I want to bring in from the Washington Post someone who's been covering this story extensively, Callum Borchers. He joins us now. Callum, I'm curious what this does to the Fox News brand. This is now the second major primetime anchor who's departed in just a matter of months.
Well, for one thing, it sort of blows up the idea that the Roger Ailes ouster was an isolated incident, right? The network tried to paint him at the time as kind of a lone wolf and acted as if the problem had been solved by his departure. So obviously, Bill O'Reilly leaving under the same circumstances kind of knocks that down. Going forward, the big question is whether he is kind of the exception to the rule or whether he turns out to be expendable. It's been interesting to look at the shakeups in their primetime lineup, right? Greta Van Susteren left in September. Megyn Kelly left after the election, and their replacements have fared very, very well. In fact, had record-breaking ratings in the first quarter of this year. So will we see the same thing now for Bill O'Reilly? Tucker Carlson's going to take over his 8 p.m. slot. Will he do just as well, or will it turn out that, hey, O'Reilly's pretty tough to replace?
Callum, these Fox News viewers are incredibly loyal. I mean, we've seen that with the ratings spike. How do you think they'll respond to the fact that a man like Bill O'Reilly, who's really been the face of Fox News since the inception, has been removed? Any sense of gauging that?
Yeah, every indication so far is that they stand by the brand, and that so far no one person is any bigger than that brand. It's almost as if the people are kind of interchangeable, right? Van Susteren goes out, Martha McCallum goes in at 7 o'clock, and the ratings stay the same or even go up. Kelly goes out, Carlson goes in, the ratings stay the same or even go up. So that's, I think, the big thing to watch for. You saw in the ratings spike that O'Reilly enjoyed after the New York Times published its investigation of sexual assault allegations. His ratings even went up. And we saw this happen several years ago when Mother Jones published that lengthy piece about how he had perhaps inflated, his war reporting in the Falklands War in the 1980s. His ratings went up during that period. I mean, this is an audience that really rallies around the network, and they embrace the idea that they are the lone, sort of fair and balanced network, as their slogan says, and that everybody else is sort of out to get them.
And Callum, talk to us more about the Fox News viewer. In the U.S. media landscape, it has really carved out a space for itself on the right. During the Obama administration, it found itself to be a real watchdog for the administration, being very critical of what the administration was doing. And this was really a network-wide. They wanted to be a balance to the seeming left-leaning bias on MSNBC. Cable news itself is something that's typically watched by people who are over 50, over 60 at some point, as far as the key demographic that is most inclined to watch these programs rather than stream them. If we had to characterize who this loyal Fox News viewer is, who is that person?
Well, as you said, they tend to be older, and it is a right-leaning audience, although not exclusively. There are independents and even some Democrats who watch the network. I think the genius of Fox News over the years has been their ability to, as you said, sort of carve out a tremendously loyal audience, particularly among Republicans. There was some great polling by Pew after this most recent election, and they asked voters, who were your primary news sources during the campaign, and something like 45% of Republicans said Fox News. It was in the 40s, which is an incredibly high percentage for just one news outlet. You compare that to Democratic voters who voted for Hillary Clinton, and they were really all over the map. Nobody was above the teens. People were reading the New York Times or listening to NPR, watching you guys, reading us. People reading any number of different sources. So what Fox was able to do, and has been able to do for going on 2 decades now, is to become kind of the one centralized source of news for a lot of conservatives in a way that no other outlet has been able to do on the other side of the aisle. It's really quite impressive.
And Callum, you also talked about there seems to be, from the outside, sort of a divide between the father, Rupert Murdoch, and the 2 sons, James and Lachlan, and a divide, from what we've heard from the outside, between the two of how to proceed on these types of cases. What have you heard about that relationship?
Well, I think it goes back to even a couple of years ago, right? So I think it was 2015 when Rupert Murdoch's 2 sons sort of were elevated into more senior positions within the company. And at that time, and I can remember writing in the fall of 2015 about some apparent tension between James and Lachlan Murdoch and Roger Ailes. Whereas Rupert Murdoch and Ailes had been friends for many years, and there was a tremendous loyalty there. And it seemed as though the younger generation of Murdochs were perhaps not quite as comfortable with the sort of overtly conservative opinion programming on Fox News. But the business model is so terrific that we haven't really seen it change, even as they've taken on bigger roles in the company. I thought what was striking, though, was that last summer, how quickly they moved to move Roger Ailes out. I mean, it was in a very short period of time. I think it was the 4th of July weekend that Gretchen Carlson filed her sexual harassment suit against Ailes, and then by the Republican convention later that month, he was gone. That was a real shift, I think. I mean, this is a guy who seemed like a real titan in the industry, almost invincible. And again, similar situation here. I mean, earlier this month, the New York Times has its investigation of Bill O'Reilly, and within a couple of weeks, he is gone. So clearly, there is sort of a shift business-wise within the network. I will say, the business is the real emphasis here, right? I mean, O'Reilly's ratings, as I mentioned, continued to be strong. The problem wasn't that. The problem was that companies weren't willing to advertise on his show anymore, right? In the last several weeks, we've seen dozens of advertisers say, we're not going to buy your airtime. And I mean, you can have all the eyeballs in the world, but if no company is willing to buy airtime to try to sell its products to those people, well, what good is it from a business standpoint?
Now, you are there in Washington. The President Trump, had publicly defended Bill O'Reilly in the past few weeks. As you mentioned, the Fox News viewer is older, tends to be conservative. There are a lot of Trump supporters that watch that network. The president has acknowledged he watches it all the time. He appears on that network more than others recently. Do you expect that those inside the White House are advising the president not to mention or discuss this at all? Because if history is any example, he might be inclined to again voice support for Bill O'Reilly. What's your take on that?
Well, I would suspect that you're right. I would suspect that the advice to the president at this point would be to just leave it alone. Coming out and supporting O'Reilly last week and then having O'Reilly forced out this week, looks bad enough. There's no reason to kind of double down after the fact now and say, yeah, I still think that O'Reilly didn't do anything wrong. So I suspect the president will stay away from that subject. I do think that going forward, one of the other questions is who among the Fox News bench is going to step out now and sort of take the O'Reilly Trump interviewer's role. I think it's an oversimplification to say that because he and Trump had kind of a cozy relationship that the interviews were always soft. That's not quite true. He wasn't perhaps as tough as you would have liked to see him, if he sat down with, a John Dickerson or a Martha Raddatz or somebody like that. But Trump wasn't willing to do interviews with those people anyway. The person he was willing to go on with frequently was Bill O'Reilly. And to O'Reilly's credit, he often used the rapport that he had with Trump to kind of get away with asking tough questions that perhaps, Trump would have thrown his hands up and just never come back for somebody else. I'm not sure that there's anybody else at the network who can do the same thing. Sean Hannity and the president have a terrific relationship. Yeah. But Hannity doesn't ask any tough questions at all.
And Callum, is there any indication that they might be looking on the outside for someone to replace him?
Well, not so far. Tucker Carlson is going to move. He's sort of been all over the place, right? Carlson originally replaced Greta Van Susteren at 7, and most recently he's been replacing Megyn Kelly at 9, and now apparently he's going to take over Bill O'Reilly's spot at 8. So clearly they think he's the new big star of the network. They are very high on Tucker Carlson. Aside from that, there's no solo person stepping in to fill the hole. So right now the plan at Fox is to move to the 5, which is sort of their ensemble cast that, includes Kimberly Guilfoyle and Dana Perino and Greg Gutfield and Jesse Waters, sort of a rotating cast. Juan Williams. They're going to move that show into the 9 o'clock slot, but and perhaps that will work. We'll see if they end up deciding to stick with that. But as far as kind of a singular figure to step in and have that same star power, nobody right now.
All right, Callum Borchers from the Washington Post. We look forward to your reporting, Callum. Thank you for joining us.